Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, and welcome to the Karey Carbaugh podcast. Buenas noches, damas y caballeros, chicos y chicas, niños de todas edades, y bienvenidos a el Karey Carbaugh podcast. Welcome. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and this is the Karey Carbaugh podcast, episode number 86. And I've titled this podcast, What is the Greatest Motivator? And as I prepared for this, I posed a question, and I appreciate all of you who responded to that. If you didn't see that question, you can catch that on my timeline on Facebook or on Instagram, and I'd still be very interested in hearing what your responses are, or you can simply put them in the comments as we go through this tonight. If you would do me a favor before we get started here and smash that like button, like if you do, and leave me a comment down below to let me know whether you're catching this live or on the replay by dropping the word live or replay or simply an R or an L in the comments. And let me know where you're tuning in from. These podcasts are reaching a lot of areas that I never dreamed we would reach. And so it's always kind of interesting for me to see where people are tuning in from. So before we get started, if you would do me that favor and do those couple of things, smash that like button and leave me a comment letting me know if you're catching us live or on the replay and where you're tuning in from, that would be greatly appreciated. And for those who are new to this podcast, once again, my name is Karey Carbaugh, and I am seeking to help people improve their self-esteem and their self-worth, in particular through biblical principles, because I am a Christian. I don't force that belief on anyone, but I also don't hide it. And tonight, I'm going to be reading a little bit more from the Bible than I normally do. So for those who are not believers, I hope you'll bear with me, and I think you'll find these principles are true even if you don't subscribe to the religious aspect. So without further ado, let's dive in here to our topic tonight. Once again, thank you to those who responded. I'm going to start by reading the question for those who didn't catch this in my comments prior to this, and I'll read this on my phone. For those who are not aware, I am visually impaired. I have low vision. I'm legally blind. So if I'm looking down at my phone and not looking at the camera, that's why. I'm not trying to ignore the camera or ignore you all. It's simply how I have to read things. And for some of this, I may even turn on my voiceover and let my phone read it so that it's a little bit quicker than what I can read. But let's start out here. So the question that I posed to you all was, what is your greatest motivator? And the choices were A, money, money and fortune, B, power, C, love and relationships, D, significance and contribution, and E, something else. And then I asked you to please explain what that something else was if you chose option E. The responses were a little bit surprising, definitely very interesting for me to follow the responses as they came in. No one chose A or B, so no one chose money or power. That was interesting. Option C, while I didn't get a whole lot of responses to this question, it certainly wasn't significantly statistically relevant, going back to some of my psychology surveys and statistics that I did, we certainly didn't get enough responses to claim that this had any kind of statistical significance. But option C had 2 responses. Option D, so option C was love and relationship, had 2 responses. D, significance, had 4 responses. That surprised me a little bit. And then E, actually, E was other, had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people chose E. So that was really the largest response. However, of those 5 responses, one of those said family relationship. So I think that could be lumped in with choice C, which is love and relationships. I could see how that might have been misconstrued to mean love and romantic relationships or partner relationships, but I really meant relationship in a broader sense. So I think family and relationship could be combined with C. Travel, that was interesting. One person said travel. So that doesn't really fit into any of the categories. 2 people said God. And again, I think arguably that could be a relationship to God. Granted, it's not a human relationship, but I think we could lump that in with love and relationships, and you'll see a little bit more why as I get into some of the biblical stuff that goes along with this. So those 2, I think we could also lump in with option C. And then the last one was peace and contentment. And clearly that one doesn't really fit into any of the categories, so that one would stand alone. But if we combine the 3 in with option C, which is love and relationships, that gives us 5 option C's instead of 2, 4 option D, and then 2 others. Once again, this is certainly not a large enough sample to be statistically significant, but this starts to point to some of the research that I did looking online to other studies that have been done on what is the strongest motivator for most people. Not necessarily what motivates you the most, which I think was more what this question asked, but what motivating factor causes the strongest response or strongest reaction. That was really more what I was getting at. But the question that I asked was indeed, what is your strongest motivator? And so I think this is interesting. Once again, 5 option C and 4 option D, which was significance. So 5 said love and relationship, 4 said significance, and then the other 2 that fell into other categories. What I found as I was looking online and what came out of a sermon recently, as many of these do, as I've mentioned before, I get a lot of my ideas from sermons. A lot of online surveys, and the Bible would certainly suggest that love is the strongest motivator. And if you think about it, not many people would die for money, would lay their life on the line for money. Some would. None of my responses that I got would. Significance, power. Wait, let me get this right. Yeah, B was power. Not very many people would lay their life on the line for power. Some might. D, significance. Is that something that you would lay your life down in order to be significant? Perhaps. But I think C, many people for a strong relationship would be willing to put their life on the line. If you think about a parent with a parent-child relationship, if your child was in trouble, most parents would go out on a limb and put their life on the line for their child. I remember as a young child, I vaguely remember the incident. I was only, I think, about 5 or 6, and we had a horse, and the horse, some of the feed in the feed bucket got spilled, and so the horse was kicking and getting a little bit violent to keep the other horses away from the feed that got spilled. My mother realized very quickly that the way the horse was kicking, my head was just about at the right level that if the horse kicked, it could have caught me in the head. She stepped in front of me and took the kick in the thigh. It bruised her thigh pretty significantly for a while. But had it been my head, it could have been much worse than a bruise. So there's an example of a parent willing to put their life on the line for their child. And so I think, arguably, option C, love and relationship, could be said to be the strongest motivator for most people. Now, none of these is going to be true for everyone. And I meant to start out here, I jumped into this topic and I didn't mention this in the beginning, so I will mention this now. I think the responses that I got to this point back to a topic that we did earlier, which was the 6 human needs. And there's a slight difference between motivators and needs. But if you didn't catch that podcast, I will, after this is over, I'll put a link. I think I can do this. Put a link back to that podcast in the comments so that you can go back and review those 6 human needs. Most of us have needs in all of these areas. The 4 that I picked fall into those human needs. I didn't do all 6 because some of them don't translate directly into motivators. But I think the significance piece that several people responded to, saying that significance is a motivator for them, that does fall more in line with the human needs. We all have needs in all 6 of the areas. It's a question of where those needs are being met, and are they being met equally, or are there some that are maybe not being met, and so those become more of a need or perhaps a motivator in order to get those needs met to make them more equal. And again, I went into much more detail on that in a prior podcast, so I'll leave that in the comments down below. I hope you're getting value from this. If you are, drop the word value in the comments and let me know that, or simply a V. And now I'll jump into some of the biblical principles that would really indicate love as a strong human motivator. Not that these others aren't strong or aren't important. They certainly are. For those who said significance is a motivator for you, I don't want to discount that at all. Simply focusing tonight on love as the motivator, because that, for most people, not all, but for most people, love is something that they would put their life on the line for. In most Christians would know this verse by heart, and I'm not going to read this one. I'll recite it from memory. John 3:16 says that God so loved the world. In other words, he loved the world so much that he gave his only Son in order that whoever believes in him would not die, but would have eternal life with him, with God. There's one example of love. God loved the world so much that he was willing to give his only Son, which, for those of us who are believers, in the Trinity, the triune God belief, giving his only Son was really giving a part of himself, because most Christians believe that God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit are all one and the same. But I won't get into that too much here because that's another whole religious topic that could be a podcast in itself. But in other words, God was willing to lay down his life. Jesus was willing to lay down his life. And we'll see that in some of these other verses from Jesus the Son's perspective. It's interesting that John 3:16 says that, and a friend of mine pointed out to me several years ago, and I'd never really picked up on this before. 1 John 3:16 says, "This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us." And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. We ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So that is basically the same verse as John 3:16, only from Jesus the Son's perspective, which I think is very interesting that John 3:16 and 1 John 3:16 essentially say the same thing. And this idea of laying down our lives for one another starts to point to this next verse, John 15:13, where Jesus says, "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." So there's no greater love than one who would lay down his life for his friends or her friends. And so this reiterates that idea of love going so far as to sacrifice one's life for another. The last verse I'm going to cover here comes from Matthew, chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. This is where the disciples are asking Jesus, of the 10 commandments, which are the most important? So Jesus has just laid out all 10 commandments, and the disciples say, which of these are the most important that we should follow? And again, Jesus replied to his disciples, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with your mind, and with all your mind." So with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And then Jesus goes on to say, "And the second, like it, love your neighbor as yourself." All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So in other words, love the Lord your God first, and then love your neighbor, love your friends, those around you, just as you would love yourself. And all the other commands, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't kill someone else. If you love your neighbor, how can you think about murder? If you love your neighbor, how can you think about stealing from them? And so this is another example, I think, of how love could be argued as the greatest motivator. Once again, I hope you're getting value from this, and I hope you can relate to this. If you can relate to anything that I've covered here, drop the word relate for me in the comments. And again, if you're tuning in later, Let me know if you're catching this live or on the replay by dropping the word live or replay, or simply an L or an R in the comments. Let me know if you are getting value and if you can relate to this. That was a lot of things I just asked you to do in the comments, but I do see some comments coming in. Before we close out here, that's most of the content that I had, but I do want to take a moment and see if I can respond, because I see several comments here. My system's being a little weird tonight, so I don't know if I'll be able to do this or not, but I'm going to try. If I don't catch some of these, I will respond to them after I sign off here, but I do like to try and catch some of your comments live, because I know a lot of you are taking the time to watch this, and I sincerely appreciate that. I've gotten so much support from you all in these comments. I know there's some that are before some of these that I'm going to catch here. Mitch Race, thank you so much for tuning in. And grateful night to you as well. Also from Mitch says, that's a superb question. Thank you. Thank you. I think that certainly gave me some food for this podcast tonight. Something great for us to think about in terms of what motivates us personally. For me, the answer may be other. Opportunity. I could see that also as a motivator, especially knowing what you're doing and where your focus on your podcasts is. I'm so glad you got value from this. God bless you as well, Mitch. I sincerely appreciate you tuning in and catching this live. I haven't caught any of yours for a while. I need to get back on yours. This gentleman, Mr. Mitch Race, is the one who inspired me to start these podcasts in the beginning. Showing up and showing light through your podcast. You're most welcome, Mitch. Thank you so much for your encouragement. Again, you're the one who inspired this to happen. So if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be doing these. So if you're not enjoying these podcasts, you can blame it on Mitch, I guess. Just kidding, Mitch. But seriously, thank you so much for tuning in live and for all your comments. If there's others who commented, I will catch those after we close down here. They may have scrolled up off the top, and I'm not going to try and scroll those up because it'll mess other things up here on my screen. So once again, I think this is all I have for tonight's podcast, for tonight's topic. I do hope you've gotten value, and smash that like button, like if you do. Leave me a comment down below letting me know what was valuable. If you have comments on topics you'd like to see in the future, let me know that as well. Most of these come from sermons. I've certainly continued getting plenty of topics. I'm not running short on topics, but I want to make sure that I'm covering things that are valuable for those that are tuning in. So if you have things you'd like me to cover, I'm open to hearing those. Let me know that. If you'd like to be added to my email list, drop the word email in the comments, or shoot me a direct message on Facebook or Instagram, and I'd love to add you to my email list so that I can notify you when I'm going live on these, and notify you about some upcoming private events that I'm starting to plan. So with that, I will give you back the rest of your evening. Once again, thank you to all of you that have supported me through these last 86 podcasts. I know I say this almost every week. I can't believe we're up to 86, but here we are. We'll be at 100 before long, which is something I never thought I'd make. But thank you so much to all of those of you who have supported me through this. And I wish you all a very great evening. Thanks, Mitch. I see your comment. You're too funny. Had to throw that in there. You know, if people aren't enjoying these, it's kind of your fault. If people are enjoying these, it's your fault as well. So, thank you so much. So, with that, I will let you get back to your evening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a blessed evening. Be a blessing to those around you and do something positive for someone you come in contact with this week. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and this has been the Karey Carbaugh Podcast. Good night for now.